Chinese authorities treated dozens of cases of pneumonia of unknown cause. On December 31, the government in Wuhan, China confirmed that health authorities were treating dozens of cases. Days later, researchers in China identified a new virus that had infected dozens of people in Asia. At that time, there was no evidence that the virus was usually spread by humans. Health officials in China said that they were monitoring it to prevent the outbreak from developing into something more severe.
China reported its first death. On Jan 11, Chinese state media reported the first known death from an illness caused by the virus, which had infected dozens of people. The 61-year-old man who died was a regular customer at the market in Wuhan, and he had previously been found to have abdominal tumors and chronic liver diseases. The report of his death came just before one of the Chinese biggest holidays, when hundreds of millions of people travel across the country.
Other countries, including the United States, confirmed cases. The first confirmed cases outside mainland China occurred in Japan, South Korea, and Thailand, according to World Health Organization's first situation report. The first confirmed case in the United States came the next day in Washington state, where a man in his 30s developed symptoms after returning from a trip to Wuhan.
Jan 23, Wuhan, a city of more than 11 million, was cut off by the Chinese authorities. The Chinese authorities closed off Wuhan by cancelling planes and trains leaving the city and suspending buses, subways, and ferries within it. At this point, at least 17 people had died and more than 570 others had been infected, including in Taiwan, Japan, Thailand, South Korea, and the United States.
The WHO declared a global health emergency. Amid thousands of new cases in China, a public health emergency of international concern was officially declared by the WHO. China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said that it would continue to work with the WHO and other countries to protect public health, and the US State Department warned travelers to avoid China.
On February 2, the first coronavirus death was reported outside China. A 44-year-old man in the Philippines died after being infected. Officials said the first death reported outside China. By this point, more than 360 people had died.
A cruise ship in Japan quarantined thousands.
After a 2-week trip to Southeast Asia, more than 3,600 passengers began a quarantine abroad to Diamond Princess cruise ship, Yokohama, Japan. Officials started screening passengers, and the number of people who tested positive became the largest number of coronavirus cases outside China. By February 13th, the number stood at 218.
A Chinese doctor who tried to raise the alarm died. When Dr. Li Wenliang, a Chinese doctor, died on Feb 7 after contracting the coronavirus, he was hailed as a hero by many for trying to ring early alarms that a cluster of infection could spin out of control. In early January, the authorities reprimanded him and he was forced to sign a statement denouncing his warning as an unfounded and illegal rumor. Dr. Li's death provoked anger and frustration at how the Chinese government mishandled the situation by not sharing information earlier and silencing whistleblowers.
The virus gets new name. The World Health Organization on February 11 proposed an official name for the disease. The virus, coronavirus, causes COVID-19. An acronym, it stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. The name makes no reference to any of the people, places, or animals associated with the coronavirus, given the goal to avoid stigma.
There were more than 14,000 new cases in Hubei province. Officials added more than 14,840 new cases to the total number of infected in Hubei province, and the ruling Communist Party ousted top officials there. The new cases set a daily record, coming after officials in Hubei seemed to be including infectious that were diagnosed by using lung scans of symptomatic patients.
Chinese officials draft legislation to curb the practice of eating wildlife. China said it was reviving its trade and consumption of wildlife, which has been identified as a probable source of the outbreak. Officials drafted legislation that aims to end the pernicious habit of eating wildlife, a statement from the Standing Committee of the Congress said.
Hundreds leave the quarantine cruise ship. After a 2-week quarantine, 443 passengers began leaving the Diamond Princess cruise ship. It was the first day of a 3-day operation to offload people who tested negative for the virus and did not have symptoms. Passengers who shared cabins with infected patients remained on the ship. A total of 621 people aboard the ship were infected.
The virus appears in Iran from an unknown source. On February 19, Iran announced 2 coronavirus cases in the country, then hours later said that both the patients had died. The source of the virus in Iran is unknown. By February 20th, the number of global cases had risen to nearly 76,000 according to the WHO.
Jan 23, Wuhan, a city of more than 11 million, was cut off by the Chinese authorities. The Chinese authorities closed off Wuhan by cancelling planes and trains leaving the city and suspending buses, subways, and ferries within it. At this point, at least 17 people had died and more than 570 others had been infected, including in Taiwan, Japan, Thailand, South Korea, and the United States.
The Trump administration asked Congress for $1.25 billion for coronavirus response. As the number of coronavirus cases around the globe continued to climb, the Trump administration began preparing for the virus to arrive in the United States. The White House asked the Congress to allocate $1.25 billion in new emergency funds to bolster its preparedness, a significant escalation in the administration's response.
The number of infections in Europe spikes. Italy, where 800 people had been infected by February 28, remained an area of concern. Cases in 14 other countries, including Northern Ireland and Wales, could be traced back to Italy. Germany had nearly 60 cases by February 27th, and France reported 57, more than triple the number from 2 days earlier. Both England and Switzerland reported additional cases, while Belarus, Estonia, and Lithuania all reported their first infections.
The United States records its first coronavirus death and announced travel restrictions. A patient near Seattle became the first coronavirus patient to die in the United Nations on February 28. As the number of global cases rose to nearly 87,000, the Trump administration issued its highest level warning known as Do Not Travel Warning.
US officials approve widespread coronavirus testing. The CDC lifted all federal restrictions on testing for the coronavirus on March 3rd. According to Vice President Mike Pence, the news came after the CDC's first attempt to produce a diagnostic test kit fell flat. By this point, the coronavirus had infected more than 90,000 around the globe and killed about 3,000 according to the WHO.
President Trump blocks most visitors from continental Europe. In a prime time address from the Oval Office, Mr. Trump said he would halt travelers from European countries other than Britain for 30 days as the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic and stock markets plunged further.
March 13. President Trump declares a national emergency. Mr. Trump officially declared a national emergency and said he was making $50 billion in federal funds available to the states and territories to combat the coronavirus.
On March 15, the CDC advised no gathering of 50 or more people in the United States over the next 8 weeks. The following day, Mr. Trump advised citizens to avoid groups of more than 10. New York City's public school system, the nation's largest with 1.1 million students, also announced that it would close.
Latin America begins to feel the effects of the virus. Several countries across Latin America imposed restrictions on their citizens to slow the spread of the virus. Venezuela announced a nationwide quarantine that began on March 17. Ecuador and Peru implemented countrywide lockdowns, while Colombia and Costa Rica closed their borders. However, Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, encouraged mass demonstrations by his supporters against his opponents in Congress.
France imposes a nationwide lockdown. On March 17, France imposed a nationwide lockdown prohibiting gatherings of any size and postponing the second round its municipal elections. The lockdown was one of Europe's most stringent. While residents were told to stay home, officials allowed people to go out for fresh air but warned that meeting a friend on the street or in a park would be punishable with a fine. By this time, France had more than 6,500 infections with more than 140 deaths, according to the WHO.
For the first time, China reports zero local infections. China on March 19 reported no new local infections for the previous day. A milestone in the ongoing fight against the pandemic, the news signaled that an end to China's epidemic could be in the sight.
Companies moved to produce medical supplies. On March 21st, the White House said that American companies were increasing efforts to restock hospitals with important supplies. Linus and General Motors agreed to make masks and ventilators. Christian Siriano, a fashion designer, Dove Charnav, the founder of Los Angeles Apparel, and Carla Clato, a swimmer company, all agreed to repurpose their operations to create masks and hospital garments.
Prime Minister Boris locks Britain down. The lockdown closed all non-essential shops, barred meetings of more than 2 people, and required all people to stay in their homes except for trips of food or medicine. Those who disobey risked being fined by the police.
The United States leads the world in confirmed coronavirus cases. United States officially became the country hardest hit by the pandemic, with at least 81,321 confirmed infections and more than 1,000 deaths. This was more reported cases in China, Italy, and any other country.
Trump signs coronavirus stimulus bill into law. Mr. Trump signed a $2 trillion measures to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Lawmakers said the bill, which passed with overwhelming support, was imperfect but essential to address the national public health and economic crisis.
March 28, the CDC issues a travel advisory for the New York region. The CDC urged the residents of the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut to refrain from non-essential domestic travel for 14 days effectively.
Most states issue stay-at-home directives. Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. issued orders requiring their residents to stay home. Similar orders went into effect for Kansas and North Carolina. Other states had previously put strict measures in place. The new orders meant that at least 265 million Americans were being urged to stay home.
Global cases top 1 million and millions lose their jobs. By April 2nd, the pandemic had sickened more than 1 million people in 171 countries across 6 continents, killing at least 51,000. In just a few weeks, the pandemic put nearly 10 million Americans out of work, including a staggering 6.6 million people who applied for unemployment benefits in the last week of March. The speed and scale of the job losses was without precedent. Until March, the worst week for unemployment fillings was 695,000 in 1982.
The debate wages over who should wear masks. The CDC urged all Americans to wear a mask when they leave their homes. However, the advice was underwrapped by Mr. Trump, who repeatedly called the recommendation voluntary and said that he would not wear one himself. With the masks, it's going to be a voluntary thing, the president said. You can do it, you don't have to do it. I'm choosing not to do it. It may be good, it's only a recommendation, voluntary.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson moved into intensive care. 10 days after going public with his coronavirus diagnosis, Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain was moved into intensive care. The decision was a precaution according to the British government, who also said he had been in good spirits. Mr. Johnson had also asked the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab to deputize for him where necessary.
Companies plans and start vaccine trials. At least 24 companies have announced vaccine programs aimed at ending the pandemic, including Novavax, a Maryland-based biotech firm that said it would begin the human trial in Australia in the mid-May. Johnson & Johnson's plans to start clinical trial in September. Even Moderna begins a clinical trial for its vaccine in March. And the Innovia Pharmaceutical injected its trial vaccine into the first volunteer in April.
Global coronavirus deaths surpasses 101,000. By April 10th, the coronavirus had killed more than 101,000 people around the globe and infected at least 1.6 million. With more than 18,000 fatalities related to the virus and nearly 5 lakh cases, the United States toll surpassed that of Spain. Also on 10th April, coronavirus cases surged in Russia. The number of people hospitalized in Moscow with COVID-19 doubled from the previous week, with 2/3 of the country's 12,000 reported cases in Moscow. The increase in case pushed Moscow's healthcare system to its limit well before an expected peak.
Boris Johnson is released from the hospital. Mr. Johnson, Britain's Prime Minister, was released from the hospital on April 12th after a stay in an intensive care unit battling COVID-19. In a video posted on Twitter, he credited the National Health Service with saving his life, calling it the beating heart of this country.